Sabataraco, and this is Bridge Prep. My guest today is Shay Fabode. He is the Vice President of Innovation and Partnerships at the Clean Energy Trust, charged with administering the Clean Energy Trust Fund and helping CET Challenge alumni grow their businesses. Prior to this, he was the CEO and co-founder of Power to Switch, which was acquired in 2013. Thank you for joining us, Shay.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start. If you could just explain to our listeners what Clean Energy Trust is.
We're a non-profit fund that is focused on the Midwest, and we help clean tech, or what we're now starting to see as resource efficiency startups, to start, grow, and build their businesses. And we do that through funding, money coming through the fund, partnering them with corporate partners that we work with, that we see as possible customers for them, who can provide mentorship or, in some cases, even business, and also wrapping curricula around them to essentially give them the tools they need to build their business, because in some cases we have super smart engineers and scientists who lack a little bit of that business acumen, but they're smart and they pick it up really quickly, and we're here to provide that to them.
Excellent. And what got you interested in clean energy initially?
So I'm an engineer, and I worked in a power station in London for about 8 years on the operations side, and I think interest in clean tech started before that, but actual participation in starting to try to move us in that direction, for me, started when I started working at the power plant. I'm Nigerian, grew up in Nigeria, close to nature and a lot of resources, where I saw how the resources were not being managed properly, and there was abundance of energy and fuel, but I guess just from a very long time ago, I realized it's impossible for fuel to be just infinite. That's just not how it works. There's an end in sight for any source of energy we use, which isn't renewable, and I just thought there was a need to play a part and engage a bit more. I fell into it in terms of working at the power station. I actually wanted to work for a car manufacturing company, but as fate would have it, I didn't get to do that, but I'm so glad things turned out as it did.
Great. So you said that you fell into it. If someone knows for certain that this is an industry they want to be a part of, tell us just a bit about what's involved in breaking into the industry. What might someone unfamiliar with clean energy not know about a career in it?
That's a really good question. What we're finding is that by the very nature of the industry, like most other industries, things are changing really quickly. So the skills you probably required 20 years ago, in terms of mining of coal for fuel for a power plant, for example, or being able to climb a pole to fix the wires when you have an outage. Those things are still out there as possible career paths in the energy space, but as we move to a more sustainable fuel mix, i.e. solar, wind, additional skills are now being required from other industries. So software is starting to play a bigger part in the energy space. data and data analysis is playing a big part. Energy efficiency, which is essentially taking the inefficient products and devices in your home and replacing them with more energy efficient ones, require skills that people in, say, construction and in the trades, electricians and plumbers. Those are skills that weren't quite relevant to the energy space before, but because of the changing nature of the industry, those skills are now getting a lot more relevant in the industry. So it runs the gamut, but I'd suggest that if you have skills in data, telecoms, construction, you are probably going to find a career path in the clean energy space because things are very quickly moving in that direction.
Great. So you mentioned this rapidly evolving landscape and need to constantly update your skills. How do you personally stay on top of the rapidly evolving landscape?
That's another really good question. You have to just pick a spot. You decide, okay, what part of the ecosystem do I want to be an expert in, and ramp up on that. For me, it's the utility as a whole. It's how do we generate, transmit, and use energy, and that ecosystem. I'm not diving into wind, for example. It's not wind, it's what happens when the wind energy is converted into electricity, and how do we get it to someone's home, how does it get used, and how can we better use it. I've picked that as the area I want to become an expert in, and I inform myself about everything else because it all fits. And I'd suggest you probably want to do that because it's considering how vast and critical the energy industry is to how we live. You'd be surprised at how little most people know about it, which is a shame as far as I'm concerned, because there's huge opportunity for businesses, for employment, and for participation in a more sustainable future. But that being said, there's a need to find a part of the ecosystem that is aligned with your personal interests. If it's wires and transmission, then you become an expert in that while staying informed of the industry. There are many blogs out there for just getting a general sense for how the industry works and what's going on, and a few books that provide a foundation that you can then jump off from to decide which particular silo of the industry you want to pay the most attention to. So it's a difficult one to keep up with, and interestingly, that's why the more traditional companies in the space, the big utilities, that's part of why they're struggling. It's changing so quickly, and by the nature of big business, it's difficult for them to adjust nimbly. But you have individuals in those companies and across the industry who are starting to blaze a trail and inform everyone as well. So I write a blog as well, just to try and keep people aware and engaged, because it matters. We all wouldn't be doing what we're doing if there was no electricity to run the things we use, but we pay so little attention to it.
Great. And what does your blog focus on?
Just starting businesses, energy, sustainability, and the more emotional part of building and running a business.
Great. Now let's talk about that, actually. We mentioned you're the Vice President of Innovation and Partnerships. Tell us a little bit about your day-to-day responsibilities. Which of those do you, in particular, find most rewarding, and then on the flip side, most challenging?
I'll start with the most challenging bit. It's the challenging bit is keeping up with the changing nature of the industry. It's changing very quickly. It doesn't look that way from the outside, but it's changing very quickly. It's very vast. It is very vast, and so um, if all I wanted to do every day was read up on the industry, my days would be filled up with content, which is impossible. So I'd suggest that's challenging, but also exciting and fun for me because it fits into the work I do. As I mentioned, we invest in uh, startups in the space, and that would cover the innovation side of the work I do. We look for really exciting startups in this space, and to make a sensible decision about investing in them, we have to educate ourselves on it. So I do a lot of that. We'll talk to the companies, talk to experts in the space, and gin up on the company so that I can make recommendations to the CEO and the investment committee for them to decide if we will invest. And there's also, on the partnership side, we work with large corporations who are trying to figure out how to navigate the changing landscape. They tell us their needs, and we either try to solve it for them internally, because we do have some expertise in-house, or we find companies that can help them solve these problems. And we almost play an intermediary role between the new companies that are trying to figure out the space and build businesses in the industry, and we connect them with the corporations, billion-dollar corporations who already have a perspective on the industry and are trying to learn as things change. My day-to-day is pretty much that, working with those startups, liaising with the corporations, making investment decisions, and reading up a lot.
Great. So staying well-read, that's critical. So this aspect of supporting entrepreneurship, at what point in your career did this interest develop?
So it's interesting. I don't know if I got interested then, but I do remember my dad and one of his very good friends leaving very comfortable jobs when I was growing up to go start businesses, and they both did really well. And just seeing the genesis of that was huge for me.
So what are you hearing from these entrepreneurs out in the field? What are they teaching you?
Oh, just they inspire me every day. It's really fascinating for me to watch people just explain their vision for their business, what they're trying to achieve, and humbling for them to express a need for help and think I can help them. So I'm learning, apart from just the nuances of particular businesses or particular sectors of the industry, I'm also learning that entrepreneurship isn't a one-size-fits-all type of thing. You have different personalities, different levels of expertise, and people have different approaches to doing things. And at the end of the day, we're all just striving to get better, to do better. And my preconceptions, my earlier perspectives on, oh, this is how it should be done, get challenged by these folk every day, because there's no one size fits all here. I'd suggest that's what I'm learning, apart from just the fact that there's just so much amazing stuff happening in the world of technology today.
Sure. Now, prior to Clean Energy Trust, you were the CEO and co-founder of Power to Switch, which was acquired in 2013. What can you tell our listeners about the general process of being acquired?
It's a lot of work. it's a lot of work, and it's also very emotional. That I didn't quite expect going in. Because if you've spent 5.5 or so years, like we did, trying to build a business, working with a great team that you've been through the trenches with, to then find yourself in a position where you're about to hand that off to someone else is tough. It's like handing your child over to someone else to take and nurture. It's tough, but in our case, it was a business decision. We had investors, we had offers to sell, and we just had to do the work required to make the sale go through. And just one thing I realized as that process was going on was that the details and the structure that in the early stages of a company we don't bother with are very important. So those employee contracts that you put off for a few months and then you just don't do because they just need to get on with the work and everyone's getting paid and things are going okay, but you did not finalize the contract. That will come around to be an issue when you're about to sell the company. And those little nuances, did you file your options 83B on a certain date versus a certain date? That determines the taxes you pay when those options vest. Did you sign a confidentiality agreement with a vendor you used out in the Philippines? Because if you didn't, will they come around and make claims to the software, and that might be something that kills the deal. So those little things that one tends to just push off in the spirit of just getting things done and doing it quickly become big deals when you're trying to work through the process of finalizing a deal to sell your company. And I learned a lot of that throughout that process, which was great learning for me because now I can, in conversations with some of the companies we've invested in, faced with that same prospect, tell them some of the things that they need to look out for.
Sure. So really from day one, making sure you have all your ducks in a row.
Absolutely.
Now, it's interesting you mentioned how emotional of an experience it is. I'm sure this is typical for a lot of people in the process of being acquired. How did that really take you by surprise, and how did you cope with all of those that emotional roller coaster?
It took me by surprise. It took me by surprise, not in terms of the fact that it was emotional. I always, throughout the life of the business, I always knew there was an emotional aspect to it. And I think my friends joke I'm an emotional guy, so it was just extra emotional for that reason. I'd suggest it was the depth of emotion that I wasn't prepared for, because it did feel like a loss. Even though it was the natural evolution of a business, when you've taken outside investment, you, at the point where there's an opportunity to sell the company, the people who put money in your company expect to make a return, and that's why they put money in, so you will sell. I didn't realize how tough it would be to make that decision. I'd suggest that was the emotional part. The rest was just the nature of what we do in building a business. It's emotional. The depth of emotions, I'd not been prepared for, and I don't think most of us are unless we experience it.
Sure. And 2 years on after the acquisition, has that changed? Have you gone through several stages of mourning, or where are we now emotionally?
Yes, I'd suggest in a much better place now. I wrote a long blog post about a year after the sale, when I was there, when I was finally comfortable with what had happened. And I had a set of conversations with some other entrepreneurs, some who'd sold their businesses for several millions of dollars, some who'd shut down their businesses, some who had had to just give it up for whatever reason. And everyone, regardless of the level of success or failure, said the same thing. It's deeply emotional. It's tough to handle. It sort of gets easier the more times you do it, but it is still emotional, especially if you pour yourself into the work you do. So yeah, I'm there, definitely much better for it, and I'm a believer in things happening as they should. In hindsight, it actually was the right thing. My wife and I had our baby about 2 months before the sale, and it gave me time to just be with my newborn son when I wouldn't have had that time at any other point. But I had a 5 or so months period where I could just hang out with him and just refresh myself with the innocence of this young boy, outside of all the pressures of trying to build a business. So in hindsight, it was the perfect time.
Getting back to, acquisitions, when did you start thinking about acquisitions? Did you start thinking about that at day one?
No. I'll be very honest, I didn't, but again, I'll go back to the point I made about if you take money from investors that are in the business of expecting returns for their money, then an acquisition or public offering or some liquidity event, which just means money is returned to the investors, is something you must bear in mind at every point. If it's just a business you're running with your own funding, and you're doing okay, then maybe you don't worry about acquisition. I'll suggest though that nowadays we build fewer businesses like they used to in the old days. If you remember, or not even remember, businesses like JP Morgan, and some of these businesses that have the names of the founders on them, they built those businesses not because they wanted to sell to someone, they wanted to build legacies. So if that's what you're out to do, then you probably don't want to think acquisition. You just want to keep growing your business and pursue it till whatever the natural end point is for you. So I'd suggest you think about acquisitions if it's your desired outcome or the expectation of your investors. Otherwise, it probably never just pops to mind. You just keep running your business and building it as you go.
Well, great, Shay. I want to thank you so much for your time today, all of your perspective and insight. We wish you the best of luck, and thank you again for joining us.
Thanks so much, Louisa, and I'm glad to be able to chat.